You and Michelle Baldwin distinguish between mechanical and seed model functioning. What are the main differences between these two ways of operating in the world? And are people generally aware of these two views?
When I wrote Step by Step, one of the things that I featured was two general models. And each of these models has a very different way of looking at people. You probably are aware that however we perceive is the basis to what we do. All right. So these two models that I was looking at, one I named a seed model, and the other one is sometimes referred to as a mechanical model. What I refer to it even more as is a threat and a reward model. Now I'm going to use my hands to show you something, and they're going to be for people so we can distinguish. The vast majority of relationships that we have today are based upon what I call a threat and reward or a dominant submission model. And that means that somebody's up here and somebody's at their feet, looking up. And whether we call that dependency and somebody taking care of them, or whether we call this the tyrant and the victim, it's still the same thing. Now, our world is permeated with those kinds of relationships, either malevolent or benevolent. Now, the other model, which is of two people being able to stand on their own feet and being perceived by each and by themselves as people, as equal people. Now, equal doesn't mean the same size shirt or the same height. It means equal in value. Because the model that depends on this, there is unequalness in value. And so in our relationships in the world, all we have to do is look around, and we see that most of them are involved with what I call this submissive domination model. And there's no way, for instance, we can have peace that way. How can you have peace with inequality?
How are blame... I've got to cut for a minute. What is that banging?
Stop. Anytime.
One of the sadnesses for me is that this threat and reward model of submissive and domination has been viewed by most people as part of the natural history of a human being. And that the results of this are looked upon as personality. And so very, very few people know anything at this point in time about how to have relationships that are equal to one another. And that's the big thing. And as I look at all of this, I know there can be no peace in the world until we know about the equality.
How are blame, threats, and fear integral to mechanical model functioning?
You know, one of the things that I ask myself whenever I see a human being is, did this person come into the world as an infant? Well, the answer is always yes. Came in pure. And then, along the way, this infant learned something as it grew about how to deal with life. And in dealing with it, learned ways how to put down their own natural feelings. Like, for instance, I meet very few adults who come to their adult life without some ideas about what they should or should not do. Now, I have no quarrel with following out your responsibility. But like, I should always be sweet. I should never be angry. I should always do the right thing. And I should never make a mistake. I mean, we're full of those kinds of things. Well, if these are inside of us, and this is impossible for us to do, then we constantly have to be living at the edge of fear. Fear that we're not going to measure up. Fear then, if we don't measure up, what happens to us? We get abandoned. And so in one funny sense, I don't think anyone meant this, but many of us adults are walking around like very little children inside, and being afraid of this and afraid of that. And so there's a direct relationship between pairing on this level of someone who is a victim and someone who's a victimizer, or somebody who is submissive and somebody who is dominating, with fear, because there is no way that either one can be standing on their own feet. And fear is a response to helplessness.
What differences arise in one's attitude to change as one shifts from a mechanical model to the seed model orientation?
Will you do that over again? I wanted to hear that second word I didn't hear.
Okay. What differences arise?
Arise. Okay.
Yeah, in one's attitude.
Okay. I'm often asked, well, all right, Virginia, the world is full of people who are dominating and submitting to each other. How do you go to being able to be equal with one another? Well, first of all, I want to say it's not easy, because remember that what we are practicing is powerful for us. It is the result of modeling. It is the same as if this were our survival. It's like we have our feet stuck in concrete. It's the same kind of thing that happens when you ask yourself to go into some kind of behavior which you never did before. It's the same kind of thing in a lesser way when people who want to smoke or who are smoking want to stop, or any other thing that we're used to. So that it is an upheaval. And that when we go to the place where we are working with people in a different way, feeling differently about ourselves, coming to people with a feeling of self-confidence, and dealing in that way with people, we're into the unknown. And whenever you go into the unknown, you are shaky. And so we need a lot of help, a lot of support. There's something very interesting in most of the Western cultures, and that is there's a lot of admiration for people who will stand on their own feet. Have you noticed that? And when you see that and you admire it, what are you admiring? You're admiring that those people don't pay attention to the people outside who are saying, oh, you shouldn't do this. Because there's a respect for what they believe fits. Now, they don't usually go and hack those people down, but they simply do not pay attention. But how many people respond when someone says, oh, I don't think you should be doing that. How could you think this or that? And then the person thinks, well, maybe I shouldn't be. And so the strength of our own convictions. See, one thing is so obvious to me after moving all over the world, is that this idea of the seed model, equality with one another of value, it fits with our biology, fits with harmony, and it fits with the harmony of the universe. So in one way we can say that our troubles today in human beings, we've been trying to live with something that isn't in harmony with our biology, or our theology, or with the universe.
You and Michelle Baldwin distinguish between mechanical and seed model functioning. What are the main differences between these two ways of operating in the world? And are people generally aware of these two views?
When I wrote Step by Step, one of the things that I featured was two general models. And each of these models has a very different way of looking at people. You probably are aware that however we perceive is the basis to what we do. All right. So these two models that I was looking at, one I named a seed model, and the other one is sometimes referred to as a mechanical model. What I refer to it even more as is a threat and a reward model. Now I'm going to use my hands to show you something, and they're going to be for people so we can distinguish. The vast majority of relationships that we have today are based upon what I call a threat and reward, or a dominant submission model. And that means that somebody's up here and somebody's at their feet, looking up. And whether we call that dependency and somebody taking care of them, or whether we call this the tyrant and the victim, it's still the same thing. Now, our world is permeated with those kinds of relationships, either malevolent or benevolent. Now, the other model, which is of two people being able to stand on their own feet and being perceived by each and by themselves as people, as equal people. Now, equal doesn't mean the same size shirt or the same height. It means equal in value. Because the model that depends on this, there is unequalness in value. And so in our relationships in the world, all we have to do is look around, and we see that most of them are involved with what I call this submissive domination model. And there's no way, for instance, we can have peace that way. How can you have peace with inequality?
How are blame... I've got to cut for a minute. What is that banging?
Stop. Anytime.
One of the sadnesses for me is that this threat and reward model of submissive and domination has been viewed by most people as part of the natural history of a human being, and that the results of this are looked upon as personality. And so very, very few people know anything at this point in time about how to have relationships that are equal to one another. And that's the big thing. And as I look at all of this, I know there can be no peace in the world until we know about the equality.
How are blame, threats, and fear integral to mechanical model functioning?
No, one of the things that I ask myself whenever I see a human being is, did this person come into the world as an infant? Well, the answer is always yes. Came in pure? And then, along the way, this infant learned something as it grew about how to deal with life. And in dealing with it, learned ways how to put down their own natural feelings. Like, for instance, I meet very few adults who come to their adult life without some ideas about what they should or should not do. Now, I have no quarrel with following out your responsibility, but like, I should always be sweet. I should never be angry. I should always do the right thing. And I should never make a mistake. I mean, we're full of those kinds of things. Well, if these are inside of us, and this is impossible for us to do, then we constantly have to be living at the edge of fear. Fear that we're not going to measure up. Fear then, if we don't measure up, what happens to us? We get abandoned. And so in one funny sense, I don't think anyone meant this, but many of us adults are walking around like very little children inside, and being afraid of this and afraid of that. And so there's a direct relationship between pairing on this level of someone who is a victim and someone who is a victimizer, or somebody who is submissive and somebody who is dominating, with fear, because there is no way that either one can be standing on their own feet. And fear is a response to helplessness.
What differences arise in one's attitude to change as one shifts from a mechanical model to the seed model orientation?
Will you do that over again?
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to hear that second word I didn't hear.
Okay, what differences arise?
Arise, okay.
Yeah, in one's attitude.
Okay. I'm often asked, well, all right, Virginia, the world is full of people who are dominating and submitting to each other. How do you go to being able to be equal with one another? Well, first of all, I want to say it's not easy, because remember that what we are practicing is powerful for us. It is the result of modeling. It is the same as if this were our survival. It's like we have our feet stuck in concrete. It's the same kind of thing that happens when you ask yourself to go into some kind of behavior which you never did before. It's the same kind of thing in a lesser way when people who want to smoke or who are smoking want to stop, or any other thing that we're used to, so that it is an upheaval. And that when we go to the place where we are working with people in a different way, feeling differently about ourselves, coming to people with a feeling of self-confidence, and dealing in that.
Stop.
I've been thinking, I want to add a piece to that, just a minute.
Mm-hmm.
If we're going to go for something as worthwhile in this world as peace, which has never been in the world before, there's only been the absence of war, it means that we really have to give a lot of support. And we have to be able, even when we feel discouraged, to know that we're going in the right direction. And that's one of the things, like when you're going to change anything, you look around for that. And so my efforts are to help people develop support groups so that they can, when they shake a little, they got somebody around to support them.
Could you please illustrate the sorts of situations in which families exhibit mechanical model functioning? What are the results? And what difference would it make if they were to change from that sort of functioning to a seed model?
All right, let me take something that's rather typical. Here's a family, and Papa's the head. Okay? And everybody behaves toward Papa as though whatever he says is right. Whatever he says they have to do. And no matter how crazy or silly or stupid he might be, the rule is you behave because you do what he tells you because he's your father. All right? The same could be true of mother. In a family like this, the rules would probably be if somebody in authority tells you to do something, you do it. All right. Now, when we behave in that fashion, we have to. What do we do when we see somebody who is telling us like that, something like that, that we know is stupid, or that is wrong, or that doesn't fit? Well, if we follow the first rule, we got to behave as though something that is stupid is bright. And that's how we turn into liars. All right. So in a family, when that's happening, one thing you can be sure of is there's not going to be much creativity. Also, there's going to be lots of fear, so therefore the creativity that could be there won't be there. And there's going to have to be lots of punishment, and they're going to call it teaching. Nobody gets any learning from punishment except how to be resentful. And there's going to be a lot of broken spirit. And so as a result, the wonder that we are gets crushed. Thank God that until we die, it can always have a chance to be revived. Now, compare that with a family in which people there really see everyone as of value, and so therefore they can comment on what's going on. If Daddy says something kind of crazy, and Mama can say, "Oh, you really mean that? You know, that sounds sort of foolish to me." Or the kids can say the same, and they can do that with each other, and that they can work on being able to support what each other has, and that they can use their energies to work with each other. One of the common things that I've often done with families is to say, what are your individual dreams, and how can each one of you help the other one to have the dreams? And it's wonderful to see a 4-year-old talk about how I can help you, Daddy, with your dream. Totally different.
What forces make us reluctant to go beyond that mechanical model?
You know, again, everywhere I go, people never question about the validity of what we call the mechanical or the threat and reward model. Never do. They always say that fits my heart. But it could never happen. So the first thing that's against it is our conclusion that it can't happen. Because look how easily we follow our conclusions about what can happen. We think we can't do something, we can't do it. No, now, I understand why, because there are very few models around like that. When people have some models to follow, they can begin to get some kind of hope. That's one piece. The second piece is the power of what we've been doing all the time, the power of what I call the familiar. We get automatic in the familiar, and therefore we have to always have some opportunity to feel, to push and to support when we go out. That's another piece of it. And I think that the third piece of it is that we plain are ignorant about how feeling works. Because so much of this has been to hide or cut down feeling. And now I'll give you an example. There are a lot of people who think that they can control aggression by cutting out angry feelings. There are a lot of people who feel that they can control bravery by cutting out anxiety. Now, the fact of the matter is, all our feelings have got energy to them. What they need is to be redirected. Without our feelings, we're just robots. And one of the big changes that's coming in the world now is learning about feelings. Feelings are not our masters. They are our juices, our energy. And so when we want to change, for instance, aggressive behavior, we don't want to stamp out the feeling, the anger. What we want to do is have the anger be looked at in terms of what does that mean for the person. So they have choices. For instance, a little boy takes his sister's toy, and he holds it. And she feels very angry about it. First of all, she can't get it back, so she feels helpless. And then she starts to pound the floor, and then somebody comes along and says she's got a temper tantrum. Now what would happen? That would be the only way out for her if she was doing that. What would happen? Somebody came along, held her on her lap, held the little boy on her lap, and just, first of all, just let them feel the sense of something warm, a body. And then to look at, the little boy has the toy, was the little girl's toy, and perhaps he can give it back. But then even at that point, the little girl can be taught several different ways that she could respond to this. She could say, you know, that's my toy, you need to give it back. She could have a temper tantrum, that's another way. Then she could say, you know, I'm too little to do this for myself, so I have to get Mommy to help me. Right, those are three possibilities. That changes either or to choice, and we need to teach our children choice right from the beginning. So here's a good example of that. I guess, you know, in the 1900s, people didn't know anything about feelings. So then they went through the period of thinking, well, if you get your feelings out, then you're going to be healthy. And then we developed a new set of masters. If you have a feeling, you should act on it. And now I think what we're really knowing is that feelings only help us to flesh out what's going on. They are not the source of where we make our decisions. The source is in terms of what fits.
It has been claimed that it is simply fear of each other that keeps the superpowers engaged in the arms race. I would like to know what the therapeutic perspective can teach us about fear. What did we learn as children about fear?
It was a very important day for me when I realized that a family is a microcosm of the world. That in a family we have all the issues of power, of autonomy, of strength, and all those issues. Now, when we teach people to compete with one another, when we shame people, when we grade people, categorize them, what we do is we trap the human spirit, and the human spirit becomes afraid. Now, as soon as someone becomes afraid, they begin then to work out ways to handle that fear, and one of the ways, a common way that people handle fear, is to attack that which they fear. Kill it, imprison it, and that's what the whole relationship is based on this planet. It's as simple as that.
How have we learned to manage our fear as adults?
Well, people often say to me, you mean you lose your fear when you grow up? I said, are you kidding? Are you kidding? I say to myself. And what we see is that the adults are behaving in exactly the same way as the children. What's different between little two kids in the backyard saying, if you don't like what I'm doing, you can go home or I'll hit you? What's the difference between that and two men are saying, if you don't do what I want, I'll take your job away, I'll see to it that you don't get what you want, or, as it goes on in street gangs, I'll kill you. There's no difference. See, I think there's a, I call it a hallucination running around, that if you get to be a certain age, you change. You don't change until you change what you believe in. Otherwise, you do exactly what you've done since you learned as a child. And just now you're walking around in a big body with big clothes with the same essential ways you learned when you were a kid.
Increasing numbers of people are coming in to the view that our safety and security do not depend upon increasing our military power, as perhaps they did in the past. What bearing does the mechanical seed model perspective have on this emerging perspective?
Well, I think it was a cause of it. I think that when we look at the world around us and we look at the build of militarism, how could people be military? Well, it happens the same, that's the way of attacking that which we fear. So, if we really want to change something, we have to go back to what many people are doing these days. They're saying, to kill off what I fear doesn't help me much. And so, as a result, many more people are feeling, now we got to have something else. See, military is just a fancy name for saying, if you don't do what I tell you, I'll kill you. That's all it is. We might as well be open about it. And so, if we give ourselves permission, as many people are today, waking up, I believe, to the very important fact that attack and counterattack have absolutely no positive value. In fact, they have great destructive value.
Would you like to take a little break?
You drink of water, then we go.
Or do you want to...
Okay.
This is another long one. One of the assumptions underlying the arms race is that power is the ability to control or dominate other persons, other countries, the environment, whatever. Of course, this view of power permeates our society. What conceptions of power are naturally associated with the mechanical and the seed models of the world?
When I look at a family, one of the first things that pops out is the whole question of power. And I saw something on television not so long ago where one piece that I saw was a shuttle going up to investigate space. And very close to that, I saw another picture of a nuclear weapon. They looked so much alike. One was geared toward exploration and peaceful purposes, the other was for destruction, but they looked exactly the same, or almost the same. All right. Now, I want to also bring in something else. Without power, we would have no lights. Without power, we would have not the energy to run something. So I'd like to talk for a moment about power as a source of energy. Now, if we think that energy facilitates instead of dominates, you see, in this mechanical or threat and reward model, power has to dominate instead of facilitate. In the seed model, it facilitates things. And so the facilitation, to have the power in your legs to walk, to go someplace. You can also use your legs to stamp on people. See, the interesting thing, power in and of itself is a neutral concept. It's the use of the power that we have to look at. Because there are a whole lot of people that in order to handle the negative uses of power want to blot out power. We can't do that. What we have to recognize is power is an energy. And we can use it for facilitation or for domination. If we use it for domination, we have to go for win-lose. If we use it for facilitation, we go through win. Now that's an oversimplified idea of power, but for me, it says almost everything that we have to say about power. Maybe I can add one more thing, and that is, if a child in a family does not learn how to stand on his or her own feet, and to learn how to both use power destructively and constructively, and to know the difference, that person is not free to be able to use themselves creatively in society.
Is this something that can be learned later in life?
Another thing people always ask me is, Virginia, I've been doing this for 100 years. Well, it's not 100. Very few people live that long. And I'm now 42. Do you think there's any hope for me? Oh, I say, wonderful. You know something? If you were 80, the oldest person I ever worked with was 94. The youngest I worked with was 4 days of age, and they all worked the same way. The wonderful thing is that because we are continually moving all the time, moving and changing, we can change at any time in our life. There is nothing that holds us back, except if we're dead, in which case we won't be here. If we've had all our brain cut out, which doesn't usually happen, although there's some people who do have that, but it's a small number. We are always able to change. And that's so wonderful.
Thank you. I thought I'd slip that in. That's not on the paper. From your experience as a therapist, where is it that we learn such conceptions of power?
Well, people often ask me, well, how did I learn this in the first place? Here, I'm such a nice, sweet person. Where did I get all this stuff? And my answer to them is to say, well, when you get stressed, what happens to you? Well, I find myself tightening up. And, okay, I said, all right, suppose somebody doesn't do something you want them to do. I get all tight, and then what do you want to do? I want to bawl them out. Oh, interesting. Why do you suppose you do that? Well, they didn't do what I told them to do. I said, where did you hear that language before? Oh, when I was a kid. Oh, interesting. So, when you didn't do something your mother wanted you to do, what happened? Well, she hit me. Okay. All right, or he hit me, or punished me, or stuck me in a closet, or didn't talk to me, or whatever it was. All right. Now, here's an important point I want to really stress. I do not consider parents to blame. What I'm putting out is that when we come in the world, we meet parents who have been learned the things that they are being at that moment. And they're only passing on what they're being. And this has gone on for hundreds of years, as long as we have been under this domination, submissive model. So that it's a very simple matter of children learn what they're exposed to. Now, so when we're exposed to different things, we'll learn different things. I mean, it's as simple as that. And then, of course, the wonderful part is if we can continue learning at any point in time. I stress the business about not blaming parents very much, because I think all that parents are children grown big, and I hope everybody understands that. And they're doing always the best they can. If they were brought up to believe that if there were a woman that it was terrible to show her legs, well, she'll pass that on to her daughter. And we get these back in two forms. Whatever it is we thought we shouldn't do, we both have that ability to model, and then we have the force against it. That's why so many people brought up in such stringent environments either are emulating them or doing the reverse, where they're acting out against them. So I think what's important, just on a logical point of view, we learn what we were exposed to. And what's important is that something comes along, and I want to emphasize this, that we can change at any point in time. And it helps nothing to say, well, I'm this way because my mother did this, that, or something else. That's not the point at all.
What forces prevent us from adopting more useful ways of thinking about the past?
I have been extremely impressed with human beings in all kinds of ways. What I'm thinking about, if I lose my keys, I've had this kind of an experience. And I said, who took my keys? I know I put them right there. And I go around, who took my keys? And then I slip my hand into a certain pocket at a moment in time, and there were my keys. And then I say to myself, how did I do this? Well, what I've taught myself to do is laugh, because I'm a cosmic joke, like most everybody else is, too. We do all these funny things. All right, how does that relate? We are not aware very much of really what we're doing. How many times can you remember what you ate for lunch? Say nothing about what you just got through saying. I mean, this is true with people. So we have this funny condition in which we are not that aware of ourselves. We're not aware of what we're doing. And being not aware of what we're doing, then we use the outside in some way to blame the outside. All right. Now, the human part of that is to learn to laugh at yourself when you're doing it. I don't know if many people are going to stop doing that, But what they can do is recognize what they're doing and then everybody have a big laugh. And I think this is what comedy is all about.
In family therapy, people are liberated from family rules and expectations which are no longer functional. How would you do this at the cultural level, since societal expectations about power and security are no longer viable?
I often get asked, and I also do these things, of working with groups of people to help them to get a sense of their own freedom. Now, I'm going to tell you what I start working with and what I think really leads to freedom. And that is a loved sense of self. And that goes like, I value me. It is to be distinguished and differentiated from selfishness. Selfishness is, I'm better than you. Has very little to do with the self. The ability to have a sense of self-worth, high self-worth, is a regard, a high regard, a value of oneself. What one really values, one will not hurt. And the important piece of this also is that to the degree that I value myself, I can value you. To the degree that I devalue myself, I both devalue you and make you responsible for how I am not valued. So everything that can happen positively happens because we change our self-worth. So when I have a group of people, as I often have, we start out with, how do you feel about being you? And most of the time when I first start that out, people say, well, I'm all right. I said, what does it feel like to live with you and your beauty? I don't have any beauty. Well, humor me for a minute. What does it feel like? You're the only one exactly like you. And that's usually makes people feel really, look up, sit and take notice. Only one exactly? I said, yes, have you noticed? And then I ask, what would you like to have happen for you? There's so much self-hatred and so much feeling that I can't ask for what I want. And so much idea that if you really like me, you'll know what I want and give it to me without my asking. Well, I say you can wait for 100 years that way. So the whole idea of self-worth is what I work with in all kinds of ways that I can, helping people to sense new possibilities for themselves, to help themselves to go places that they haven't been. And like when I work with a whole lot of people who are poor, one of the first things I do is to help them to see a sense of their own value, of what they can do well. And it's fascinating what happens, because a lot of the people that I work with who are considered poor people find, as we work together, as they begin to love and value themselves, they are able to deal effectively with what they want for themselves. There's something else that's important here too. Recently I read a book called Super Powerlessness, which really was a comment on the way a lot of people try to help people, which is to have them adjust to what's going on. Instead of helping that being to be as strong as possible and make the changes in the world as a result of that strength that we need. My hope in working with people is that that beautiful thing we all own, with our eyes and our ears and our ability to touch and smell and feel and think and move and speak, it's in such great condition and is so connected with connected that it makes it a place of strong power for us to do the things we have to do. Because let's face it, this world is in a place that needs lots of correction. And we can't correct it with people on their knees, and we can't correct it with people who are arrogant. We have to correct it with people who are strong and are willing to move in. So that's the kind of attitude that I take, and it works.
You've touched just a little bit on how we can take the individual and collectively put that individual into a country, into an international setting, into a global setting. Would you mind elaborating that just a bit further than you did in those last few sentences?
I work all over the world. I work countries, Eastern Bloc countries. I work in third world countries. I work in fancy, sophisticated countries. The skins are different colors. Language is different. What people eat is different. How they handle their marriage practices might be different. All kinds of differences. But you know what's interesting? Their heads are always on top. Feet are always on the bottom. Arms come out at the shoulders. Blood's always red. Tears always wet. Agony sounds the same. And so the sense of what is human is the same. And all these others are variations on a theme. Now, I respect and value all those variations, but I don't mix them up with the basics. I don't disregard them, because every one of those has beauties to them of some sort. The unfortunate part still in the world today is that people take the variations, talk about them as though they were basics, and then grade them in terms of their value. So I change that where I go, and by my reaction, people get different ideas, and they begin to be aware about their unity, and to know that wholeness is a combination of unity and diversity. So that's a very important, well, let me put it this way. How I approach you, or any group, is going to be the basis of how I am going to deal with you. So you can see that people who come with all the prejudices are not going to be able to move very much.
Thank you. You have said that one of the main contributions which family therapy will make is to help us avoid nuclear war. And you have devoted yourself to this field for many years. What is it that you would like most, what is it that you would most like us to be aware of as we face our nuclear situation?
I think that we have to look at where our strength comes from. In order to do a successful job of developing peace, we have to look where our strength comes from. I will give you where I believe it comes from, and now having been in the field 51 years and done what I've done, I think at least I can speak for me about where strength comes from. Strength comes from honoring every part of myself. It comes from being able to value myself, and in the valuing of me, to make really congruent relationships with you, that you are of equal value to me. It comes from enjoying myself, and the sacredness that I feel for all life, and also from all the humor that we have. This is what it comes from. And for a flexibility and an openness to all kinds of possibilities. And then to know that life does not stop after 50. It moves on, and that life is a constantly evolving thing, and we don't have to, because a lot of people don't. We just keep evolving, evolving. And it seems that our flesh follows our feeling of value about ourselves. It's not the other way around. So we're in for a nice change. And in our continent, I believe, for Canada and the United States, in 20 years we expect that 30% of the population will be over the age of 60, which is a very interesting thing, never happened before. And so in a way we're kind of nudged to take a look at what life is and how we can continue to have it grow. And that's by the seed model. By the threat and reward and mechanical model, what we're supposed to do is we're supposed to start to wear out, then go to the rocking chair and be a burden on somebody. Well, that's all in our head.
Wonderful. That is the end of the questions for that section. How?
Okay, anytime.
Okay. Can you share with our graduate students the essence of working with, your philosophy of working with families?
I'd love to. I give a lot of thinking and thought to how could we use professional training to turn out people who have more fun in their work. One of the things that I notice is how depressed so many therapists are, and social workers and psychologists. And I don't know if the figures are still there or not, but it's starting with psychoanalysts, moving down the ladder, that all the professional helpers are higher in suicide than anybody else. I don't know if you know that. So I hope we could get rid of that. So now thinking about I want to talk about training, because I believe that the context in which you train has to mirror the concepts you're trying to teach. So if you then following mine, which is that everyone is of value, and that we work on the process of evolving and reinforcing self-esteem as we go along, then every graduate program, every graduate course, every teacher and every student will be working on that. So that when a student asks a question, it would be an opportunity for a learning. And that instructors would feel free to create in whatever way they wanted to, that felt good to them, experiences for learning. Now, there is a whole lot of content that we learn, but a lot of times we come to graduate school and we haven't the vaguest idea of how to learn. Because the process of how the professional learns is exactly the same process for how somebody that you're working with learns. And if we were to think that all learning is the same, you start from a place which is rigid and formed and concrete, because we've done that, and we have to move into the unknown, the processes are the same. So that instead of only looking at content, we would look at the process in the room, in the room where we're learning. Is this a process that is going to facilitate the learning, and can we make the process as obvious as we want the content? I remember walking into a classroom, a graduate school classroom, in which they were talking about rapport, and there wasn't a bit of it in the classroom. So this business about making a context which reflects what you're teaching is number one. And again, all processes of change are the same in whatever context they take place. Okay? All right. Now that reflects something that I've noticed and that I watch in the context when I'm working with people, when I'm demonstrating with families in front of a group, whatever it is, I'm working with a staff. I'm not really working with any different processes. I'm working with the same ones. It's just the context that changes. Maybe the language changes a little bit. Maybe the examples that I use change a little bit, but the process doesn't change. All right, that's number one. We are all living by universal processes. Now, the next piece of it would have to be widest possible connection with all walks of life. I was one of the people who worked with Tim Tyler in developing the School of Social Work at the University of Calgary. And I must say, we had a perfect school, I believe, as perfect as it could be in a professional school. It isn't. It has changed. I don't know if it's still perfect or not, but anyway, I haven't heard about it from a long time. But the important piece of that was that what we worked out was that people learned. They went out into families, and from 3 o'clock in the afternoon until the evening, and they learned what they did. And they were engaged in the process of learning how to observe, and to observe before they made judgments or judging anything. You must know that as soon as you judge something, there's nothing more to look at because you've finished it. And so their excitement about learning developed in this. Now, to also learn about human beings and how human beings work. And when I say that to a lot of people, special professional people. Well, they said they took child development and they know all about that. Well, I don't believe that. I believe that we need to pay attention to what motivates us when we are, for instance, when we hit a difficult thing, when we are joyful. What kind of prohibitions do we put on ourselves? So that in the classroom, at least in professional education, whether it's psychiatry, social work, or psychology, or whatever it is, that we learn as much about life as we can. Going back to the Calgary experience again, people could go out into families, but they would go and look at in political places. Some of them probably went to the morgue, to go all kinds of places, to a school, where a nursery school. I mean, to get acquainted with life and what was happening, to sit with some old people and listen to them. I mean, this kind of stuff. So that what we're doing is giving a context of life. Then to look at all of this in relation to how we can then begin to understand something that's present but not manifest, to look behind what's there, how to meet what's there. Now, we've got a whole lot of jargon in relation to that, and I don't have anything against that. The part that I get worried about is that so much of professional education is related to pathology. Pathology happens, but pathology is not where we're going to make the change. We're going to make the change on helping the health to develop. Paying attention, of course, to the pathology, but that's not the center of it. A difference, a way to explain that, at least the way I see it, is somebody comes to you depressed, and you ask them all about their depression, all about who is depressed in their family, and so on and so forth, and you've used the word depressed so many times that both of you start getting depressed. All right, so instead somebody comes in depressed, and you look at this, and then you say, how would you like to be? And what stands in our way of being what we would like to be? So that's you see, that's again looking at what I call the addition thing instead of let's keep subtracting here. Let's get rid of something. That's subtraction. Addition, what can we add? And then on the principle of that begins the principle of transformation. If I add to what is, then I get something different. And what I don't use atrophies by disuse. So that whole principle of what happens. I have a lot of empathy for the people who work in the human services, both from psychiatry all the way down, medicine and to social work, so on, is that I think for the suffering that so many of those people have and the results that are so little in relation to all of the energy put out, and that's for the people who work on the pathology model. And I think here are these great souls, and they could have more fun. Several years ago, 8 psychiatrists committed suicide in 2 years in San Francisco. And one of the psychiatrists and myself, a woman, and I decided to look into that. And what did we find? They were dealing all with pathology, their homes, they didn't have all those great relationships in their families, and they were stuck in their work for 10 hours a day, and life got black. And since that time, and we developed a committee, the American Psychiatric Association. First time it came was at 11 o'clock at night in the meeting. The next year there was so much clamor for it that how can you keep your mental health while you're working with the calamities of the world? So anyway, so thinking about that. How can you bring humor and life into the room? So I mean, I'm not giving a curriculum at this point, but what I'm doing is looking at what's happening. And we can still look at how we think people get the way they get. But let us always remember that that's not very much about people. That's our idea about what happens when we're with people. We're living, breathing, touching, moving human beings. And it's that kind of stuff that makes a change, not what we know in our heads about something.
Strikes me as I'm listening to you that this isn't just for people in the social areas, but for any graduate student anywhere, that this kind of an adaptation of the curriculum will be extraordinary.
Got news for you, it's in the kindergarten as well.
How's our time in terms of questions?
Yeah, about 10, 12 minutes.
Oh, okay, so let's keep on going then. Do you want to answer the one about the ideal graduate program, or do you want to skip down now to one on the family? Do you have any-
Let me make a few comments, and let's just see. Then you add this in the editing to it. I play around with things about ideals because I have a hunch that we can approach our ideals more than what we do. And I've had many training programs. I've always been proud of them. Each one is better than the other. And I think of an ideal training program that comes out with a person really being knowledgeable about their own roots, knowing their own families, understanding how they learned, what they learned, and changed whatever learnings that they need to fit for them. Like if they grew up with the idea they should never be angry, that now that they can allow themselves to understand what anger means, and they use it appropriately and so on. And that they are happy, and that they can make decisions easily, and that they're vital people, and that they love people. Now that would be my idea, and that they're able to be cognitively very erudite, because I love the whole idea of cognition, but not at the expense of intuition, nor to have intuition or go by the seat of your pants without also letting your cognitive part be there.
That also has applications, does it not, at all levels of humanity? In your work, as you said earlier, you've been working for 51 years. I'd be interested in your comments on whether or not you feel families of the 80s are different from families of the 50s. If they are, how are they different?
I recently wrote an article about change. And in 1900, men owned all women and children. The families were absolutely under the domination of the male. If he was a nice male, it was fine. If he wasn't, it wasn't so fine. If he was stupid, it was nice, etc., etc. All right. Until women didn't get the vote till 1920, at least in the States, I think. In Canada, they may have gotten it earlier. And that picture pretty much stayed about the dominant male and the submissive female and so on. Until about after World War II. Okay. World War II, women said, well, first of all, they demonstrated to their own satisfaction. They could work in the factories, they could do all kinds of things, because often women suffered from low self-esteem. So in the 50s, women began to say, I don't want to be on my knees anymore. Now, as soon as they did that, that had to change something with a male. And many of those early women could only see that they could have something at the expense of men, which was only turning around. Well, so then it got to, and then families changed because a lot of women left families and divorced men and so on and so forth. So that changed. Well, that was the beginning of what will a new family look like when we have people of equality. And I now see lots of evidences of males and females coming together with a sense of real value about each one, that they are coming together in value, as each one is a valuable person, that the roles are no longer only sex-linked, that is, a man can change diapers as well as a woman and so on, and there's much more flexibility. Now, as we went from the 50s, which we could say was the beginning when this development happened, and then as we watched that move on through the 60s, which at least, you know, let it all hang out kind of thing, a lot of things happened where we didn't give anybody any kind of direction. Then we went into the 70s, and we began to have a bounce back a little bit, but not in the same, I don't think anywhere near to the same degree, but there was a wish for some kind of stability. And all the fine things about men and women that they could do with one another were beginning to come again, make their appearance. So that the families that are coming today, it seems to me, have got some solid information and experience behind them, so that we're already seeing women are marrying a little later, and they really want to have an opportunity, many of them, to be mothers, but they also want their career. Many of them are handling it by having their career first and then having their children and maybe going back to their career. There are a lot of changes, but the changes, it seems to me, are all for the better. because we had to go through that chaos period to change that horribly rigid pattern about women having nothing. But then, of course, as one man said to me, when women get their liberation, we get ours too. As one man I heard in an airplane talking with another man about this subject, he said, when my wife began to stand on her own feet, she didn't have to stand on mine anymore, and it was a big relief. I could use only my feet for myself.
Well, we're on the subject of women and this movement that you've outlined. How do you feel as a woman in today's society, and what kinds of changes have you felt that your work has helped to create for other women?
My own place in my own awareness of myself as a woman, I don't think when I started out I thought much about that. I just had an idea, and I grew up with the idea that if I had something, I'd just go find some way to express it. I didn't think of it in sexist terms. I got reminded here and there, but not very much, because I was the only woman, and one of the leading women, perhaps the leading women for a long time in this whole business of family therapy. I had good relationships with the males, and this was also a leading, a new thing, so that there wasn't a whole lot of stuff developed about it yet. That came a little bit later. So, from my own point of view, I didn't see much of all of that. However, I certainly saw a lot later with other people, and then there were some things that began to happen. I know that some of my work has influenced people, and I'm delighted with that. And I believe that it's influenced in the way toward personhood. I'm sure a lot of women feel better. A lot of women say to me when they're with me, you know, you're a good role model. And when I hear that, what I think it means is that I'm equally at home talking erudition as I am working with my intuition, and feeling perfectly comfortable with males, which I do. I like men, but I like women too. So it's not a matter of either or. So at this point in time, I don't want to say that I never experienced, you know, some discrimination at the hands of men, because I know I have. But for me to be serious with me, I had to also accept it as a put down, which I never did. I just went around and did something else. And I was fortunate because I could move around some other place. That isn't true for everybody else. So from my point of view, I had the freedom perhaps to do some things that other women couldn't do because they didn't have all the freedom to move.
One last question. That is it possible for you to help every family that you work with?
People often ask me, can you be helpful to every family you work with? My answer is yes, of course I can. Now why is that true? Because they can. Well, that's provided that they can see and hear and touch and taste and smell and feel, think, move, speak, okay? And anybody that can do that can be helped. All right, now there's another criteria for helping, and that is whether or not they want to be helped. So let's put it together. A family who wants some help can be helped. All right, now the next question is, what's the form of success? Now, here's another thing. So if I say, would I be successful in getting somebody to get this job or to not get that one, or to get married or not get married, I don't fool around in those areas because I don't think that's my business. That persons develop a higher sense of their own ability to take risks and to make decisions, I can guarantee that would happen. Now, there's lots more that has to happen after that. So it depends on what you call success. And for me, success is measured in terms of the freedom of the person to make independent action and to gain strength, to be able to cope more congruently with problems.
Thank you. Thank you so very much.
You're welcome.
This is just a pleasure beyond expression.
Thank you.
Oh, I do.